Hello there and welcome Virtual Space Hero community to our this week's LinkedIn live conversation. And thank you so much for all your questions beforehand, because I know some of you cannot be with us here live today. So they sent me the questions beforehand that we don't miss to pick them up in the conversation. Last week, we had a tremendous conversation with Elise Keith from Lucid Meetings about how to navigate your company's way into new ways of working. And today, I'm very happy to have my first head of remote first manager on the show, who is joining us to talk about how to manage perceptions of bias and fairness in hybrid organizations. And with that, a big applause and welcome to Jason Morwick from Cactus Communication.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Hi there, Jason. It's fantastic. Thanks a lot for taking your time in your calendar to be with me on my show here. And also, it was really fantastic to get to know you a little bit better beforehand. So I do know that you have already experience as a remote worker for the past 17 years, correct?
That's correct. I first started remote working full-time back in 2006. And I made that personal transition from working in an office full-time to working full-time remote for a company that was on the other side of the country, 3 time zones away.
Oh, mamma mia. And how did that go? So let us know a little bit, how was that transition handled by yourself, but also by the organization?
Well, of course, I thought I could do it easily. Just like a lot of workers, they think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to work from home. That should not be a problem. Well, I found it the hard way because I had 2 young children. I had a spouse working at home. There was a lot of distractions, a lot of complaints that people have made during the pandemic. I went through all that many, many years ago and had to work through those challenges. In the organization itself, they were used to remote workers. Most of the company was based in California, but they did have a lot of remote workers. They had a remote work policy already in place. They did have the technology, at least what technology we had at the time, 17 years ago, to support remote working. So from an organizational perspective, it went well. But from an individual perspective, there was a lot of lessons learned, a lot of trial and error as I went through this.
That's why I assume this is absolutely fantastic. You being now in a function, in a role where you exactly can build up on all that experiences that you have for the past 17 years. So really many years there. Jason, you are now working for Cactus Communication, and let us know a little bit what was happening with the company. So you're on your way now to become a remote first organization.
That's correct. Now, Cactus traditionally has been an office-based culture. Cactus has been around for almost 20 years. There are approximately 1,200 employees. 85% are based in India. And then we do have offices, China, Japan, Korea, the United States, Denmark, and in the UK. So with this company culture, we are now transitioning to what we call a remote first culture. Now, unlike some other software companies like Automatic or GitLab or some of these other fully remote companies, we are not going to close down our office space. We are going to keep our offices. We have about a half dozen offices worldwide. We're going to keep those as resources for those employees that are co-located near those offices. They can use those as they would any other resource. But we don't require our employees to live near the office or even live near their manager. So they're free to move about their country as they want to, as they deem fit, wherever they can work best.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting, because I also had on my show here John Lee from Work From Anywhere team, and they talk about tax complexities.
Yes.
So it's always also an issue of taxes on how free people are to move around, right?
That's correct. So the challenges come when people want to move from one country to another. But even in the United States, we have challenges between states. From one state to another, we have tax challenges that we have to work through.
Okay, so you're probably more experienced. US companies should be more experienced than any other companies in that case.
Yeah, I always recommend that people seek outside counsel before they, go into those types of arrangements, because there are so many complex rules when it comes to taxes that you really need the outside experts to weigh in.
Absolutely. So you're still keeping your offices, but you're moving remote first. What was now? What are the steps that you're undertaking in this transition as an organization? And also, how did your role came up? Is it something that that came up from the very first moment? We need a head of remote first. Is it something that you brought up, or how did that go?
Actually, it was brought up by the CEO, Abhishek Goel. He recognized about 6 months into the pandemic that the pandemic wasn't going to end or wasn't going to end anytime soon. And he at least had the foresight to recognize that the world was changing and that the company needed to change as well. So he made the executive decision to go remote first. And that was a bit disruptive within the company because I think a lot of people were expecting to return back to the office and go back to what it was like pre-pandemic. So he decided to institute a head of remote in order to help with that transition. So what we've been doing is communicating and doing a lot of communicating with employees to make sure that they understand what the end state should look like, what the goals of the program are, to institute policies to help support and empower them as they make the personal transition to work remotely.
Fantastic. So if we talk about hybrid organizations or hybrid work, honestly, it's very interesting because my area of research was new ways of working for over 10 years. And in my research sort of group, we always called it new ways of working. And now it's all about not even anymore remote work. It's all about hybrid organizations.
Right.
And hybrid also, it sounds so technical, does it?
Yeah.
How do you feel about terminology? What is hybrid for you? And that's why I'm also picking up here on a question from Vincent. Thank you very much, Vincent. So what is a hybrid organization? Is it a hybrid work format? Yes, but does it make the organization hybrid?
Yeah, there are many different flavors of hybrid, and that's what we're seeing out there in the workplace right now, because you have companies that are office-based, and then you have companies that are fully remote, where they have no corporate offices. Everybody is working from home or working remotely. But then we see all these hybrid organizations, and that ranges everything from what Microsoft plans to do when they return to the office, which is their employees are going to come in 3 days a week, and the company is going to let employees know which 2 days they can work from home. Now, that's very different than, say, what Cactus or a company like Coinbase is doing, where they have offices, but they're not dictating their employees come in at all. They're saying use it when you want to, use it as a resource. So that is very different. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum. And then you have everything that's kind of a mix in between. So you're going to have workers that come into the office perhaps frequently. You're going to have other workers that may not come in at all and be fully remote. And that's what's going to create the challenge, I think, for most leaders, because during the pandemic, the benefit was we all had the same shared experience, right? We were all remote. So everybody was going through the exact same thing at the same time. Now, in this kind of hybrid environment that we're morphing into, you're going to have a different employee experience depending on if you come into the office or if you choose to stay remote. And that employee experience could change on a daily basis. So that's what's going to challenge most leaders, to try to keep a level playing field.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because the debate that you were mentioning exactly, do we dictate or do we not dictate the days that our employees should come in? And that's a daily conversation I'm having also with organizations I work with. And it's interesting because I just discussed it with Elise last week as well, in an interview from Nicholas Bloom, the Stanford professor who wrote the article, the HBR article, Don't Let Your Employees Choose the Days of Working from Home. His argument, or one of his main arguments, is that if we want employees to come happy to the office shouldn't be empty. And that's what very often would be happening, at least on Mondays and Fridays, because nobody would be there. And those who would be there would be unhappy, sort of. That's, well, a very simplified dialogue probably. But that's why he also said, like, we need to support, he's not using dictate as a terminology, but we need to propose, as a more liberal word, propose days when work from the office, so that we are all of us are there. And that's also what I think Microsoft was then arguing, also Apple was arguing. We want people to be there at least one day, and that's why we're dictating that, so that people can sort of experience when being together. What do you think about that, Jason?
Hey, sometimes I wonder if they're doing it for that reason, or it's the fact that they've spent billions of dollars. If you look at Apple, for example, who spent billions of dollars on their Starship campus, now you have to let all your employees work from home. And I'm sure there's executives somewhere wondering why they spent all that money. So I think some of these large corporations, yes, they want people to come into the campus. There's a very old school mentality of people work better when they're face-to-face, but there's not as much research around that supports that. For us, being a smaller company, being only 1,200 people, it's really around our talent acquisition strategy, right? In Mumbai, where we have a lot of our folks, it's very, very competitive for talent. The attrition rate in most companies is around 24%. And we're competing against companies that are 10 times our size. So as part of our talent acquisition strategy, we're going to hire talent wherever we can find it. And that means all over the country, all over the globe. So there's no way we can feasibly bring people in 3 times a week, or, even a couple of times a month if you're talking about the entire company. We have to be more flexible and allow people to work where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also this is when I discuss with the companies that I work with, everybody's complaining about a war for talent, or that they're not finding the talent that they are looking for, but still they keep, or they stay very much in the old way of working, in their old mindset on how to, and I'm like, how do you want to attract them? Because they are valuing whoever, and it's not even only a generational thing anymore. And that's what I find very interesting, because now, before the pandemic, in my research at least, we always saw that particularly younger generations wanted to have the flexibility. But now it changed. And it's not only younger generations, it's middle agers, it's older employees as well. And it's also across the different roles. It's so fun. I'm working with an organization that they are having major troubles now, particularly with one employment group, and those are the secretaries. Because they say, well, we were never allowed to work from home because we were told that work cannot be done from home. But now we have shown for over a year that it can be done from home, and still we're not being allowed. And that's so interesting to change now the mindset of the managers who want to have something printed out in the morning with the coffee on the table, right? Because it challenges a lot status and, well, culture there.
Right. And you said something about the generational differences. And what I find interesting is that we have some data coming out now that say that younger workers are the ones that actually want to come into the office more than, say, older workers. And if you think about that, it may have something to do with the fact that if they're new to the organization, especially coming right out of the university or college, they want that interaction with their manager. They want that social interaction with their peer group. So they're going to want a space where they can congregate and come in and use that. So I think in the future, we're going to see office places change as well. If you look at any office, and I've been in offices in Europe, Asia, and of course, America, they're all kind of built the same, right? They have a lot of cubicles or offices and a few conference rooms that everybody fights over. And what the workplace design tells you is that that office is for individual work with a little bit of collaboration. And I think it's going to be flipped in the future, that office places will be a place for people to do team building, for solving business critical problems if they have to meet together as a team, for more social aspects of getting to know one another versus just doing individual work. So the workplace design, I think, will change to reflect the new ways of working.
Yeah, I'm a total believer in this as well. And we just recently wrote an article with a colleague of mine, with Nina, about how the office needs to be rethought. Because otherwise people, if I'm in an office and I'm just doing video calls all the time, if I'm not interacting, if I'm not collaborating, and if I don't have the possibility from an architectural point of view to do something differently there, why should I be there?
Exactly.
And this is really viewed very critically. Jason, so you are now on with your organization, you are moving towards remote first. You're having a lot of communication in place to all managers, to all employees as well. Today, we want to focus to discuss on the topic of bias and perception of bias. Right. Why is this an important topic when we talk about hybrid work?
Like I said, when we were all working remotely, during the pandemic, we had that same shared experience. Everybody is being treated equally because we all have that same experience. But now, as we start to go back to the office, we're going to see people that go to the office more frequently than others. Some people are fully remote and don't have the capability to come into the office. So that's where a lot of leader biases come in, like proximity bias, familiarity bias. So leaders that choose to come into the office every day or more frequently than others, because that's their work preference, are they going to, be biased, or at least communicate more frequently and effectively with those that are physically present in front of them versus the remote employees? And what happens over time within a team is that can create some friction, right? Because then your remote employees don't feel as valued, they don't feel as connected to the organization. And that, from an organizational perspective, is where you can see some attrition happen.
Absolutely. And when it comes to careers, for example, I
Mhm.
just recently read a research about remote workers very often being overlooked when it comes to career steps. Even apparently, the study found out that remote workers very often have a slower increase of salary compared to their in-person or in office counterparts, to say so, or those who prefer going to the office or who more often go to the office. So what do you do? Because you're becoming or you're in the way to become a remote first organization. So how do you try to counteract this, to change
Yeah.
mindsets? What are the steps that you're taking?
Well, there's a couple things we can do from an organizational perspective, and then from a leader perspective, and then from an employee perspective, right? So, from an organization, technically, I roll up through the HR organization. So, we as an HR group, we can monitor certain things like promotion rates and career development to make sure that we're not seeing any sort of negative trends with our remote workers versus those that come into the office more frequently. From a manager perspective, and this is something that's a responsibility of all leaders, is to make sure that they are treating their workers fairly across the board. So that comes down to how they interact with people in the office versus how they interact with people that are remote. We can get into more details around some techniques around that. And then there's the employee responsibility, right? Because if you're remote and you don't want to be out of sight, out of mind, if you don't want to get lost in the shuffle, then you have to be proactive in how you communicate, how you participate and engage with other people. You can't just wait for your manager to do it for you. You have to take steps yourself to take control of your career development and to ensure that you'll be ready for the next promotion or whatever comes up.
Yeah, and I think this is so important because you were outlining here three different levels: the organizational, the leader's perspective, but also the employees sort of role. And very often I find when I do coachings, particularly with remote workers, that sometimes they're not aware about how much more responsibility they need to take. I'm not even sure. Let's discuss maybe if that's fair. But I'm always telling them, you need to show up more. You need to
Yes.
speak up more, just because being a remote worker at this point, still, you have a slight disadvantage. So that is at least what comes out. And very often I have the feeling that in organizations, it is not clear that it's also there for the remote worker to do something more. What do you think about that? Is it fair?
Absolutely. I think remote workers can take charge of their own career. They can take charge of what's happening. And it's little things too, Barbara. I think when you're in a meeting, turning on your video, right? So you're seen and not just heard. Because a lot of times in the office place, let's just say you're not a very vocal person. You may show up in a meeting, people know you're there, but perhaps you're a little quiet, you're processing things and they're going to respond later. But now in the virtual world, when you just call into a meeting, you don't put your video on, people will forget that you're even present. So you want to make sure that people can at least see you. You also want to participate and engage other people in that meeting in a way so that they know that you're adding value, even if it's just asking good questions. And you can do that through preparation and just making sure that you understand the topic at hand. And again, if you're not that very assertive or vocal person, well, that's fine. After the meeting is over, follow up with people. Ask them questions, offer suggestions, and again, add some value so that they see what your capabilities are.
And I think it's interesting because sometimes we believe that it's only about talking in the meetings. Sometimes being active on the chat for those who don't feel comfortable to be
Exactly.
vocal and on maybe even on camera, because I do work with people that I have the feeling they're just not comfortable with camera on. I tell them, of course, being visible makes sense, but sometimes it also helps that you're more active in the chat. And of course, not just with stupid whatever blah blah comments, but with thoughtful things that they might feel like intimidated to say in the first moment in front of the whole crowd, whatever crowd it is.
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways to engage, right? And there's multiple tools that you can use before, during, and after a meeting, so that you can make sure that people recognize what you're bringing to the table.
Absolutely. So now you also mentioned before on the organizational level, of course, but also the leaders. So
Mhm.
what do you do? Let's connect organizational and leaders level. How do you connect those so to change mindset? Because it's also a cultural shift to be
Yeah.
remote first, to be async first, which goes
Yes,
hand in hand to some extent.
exactly.
How do you manage it? Is it trainings? Is organizational development? What measures? What are you doing there?
Yeah, all the above, right? So we're doing training, we're trying to create that awareness, but also trying to get leaders to do this from the very, very top level, right? Because if you lead by example, starting at the very top, at the executive level, it'll get pushed all the way down throughout the organization. So if we're talking something, say, about being more async, because I come from a very meeting-centric culture. Well, people like to call meetings and have meetings. So how do you transition that to a more async culture where you're doing things offline or using other different tools to communicate the same information? Well, you get the leaders to do that first, and then people will start to follow suit as they start to adopt it more and more.
Absolutely. And I found it very intriguing in a conversation I had with Nancy Settle-Murphy. She's also a remote hybrid working expert. She said it's so important also to think about where are the important decisions taken. Because, of course, the moment that you're not aware that each and every important decision is taken, maybe with a picture in the office, just sublimely, you're conveying the message that, okay, all decisions are taken in the office. So even like those small things to think about on how you communicate where decisions are taken, it was just interesting to hear that.
Yeah, we want to be very intentional and purposeful with our interactions, right? So if you're going to meet with someone synchronously, whether it's in person or whether it's virtual, then you want to have a purpose to that, right? Why are you meeting with them versus doing it asynchronously? So, and we've kind of outlined some guidance for people, such as one-on-one conversations, which are career development in nature. And a lot of people say they do one-on-ones with their direct reports, but a lot of times they're just business updates, right? That could be easily replaced with an email. So we want to think about, those career discussions. Those should be done synchronously. Perhaps it's a team building event, or perhaps it's a problem that really needs to be solved quickly. And we've gone back and forth a few times virtually or asynchronously, and we couldn't solve for it. And now we have to meet in real time. So there's a few different circumstances where we say, okay, it makes sense to meet synchronously, but in other cases, we just want to push that to other asynchronous means.
And you're mentioning an important tool, in my opinion, which are the one-on-ones. And it's so interesting that if I look back to the organizations that I worked in as an employee or the organization I work with now, I think, I don't know, maybe 3% have one-on-ones institutionalized, whether they are in presence or remote, because one-on-ones in the management literature, they exist for decades already, I would say.
Right.
And it's a tool totally underutilized. And I remember, and it's fun because I was just last week and I was meeting some ex-colleagues and one who was my previous boss, and she was the only one who institutionalized one-on-ones. And interestingly, of course, what was the first thing that happened when she started doing one-on-ones on a regular basis with all the researchers at the Institute? I felt like, oh my God, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Because that's also like a cultural thing, like, oh my God, why does she want to meet with me on my own? I can handle, I'm a senior researcher. What does she want to do with me? And it was so interesting then. Of course, I was only able to reflect on that after a few weeks after the first one-on-one, because I was really a little bit like annoyed of it in the first moment. But then it was interesting to see what it made with me.
Right. So, I mean, those are the types of things that we want to keep synchronous. And then the other things that, like I said, if it's just pushing information, if you're just disseminating information, that can be done in a variety of different asynchronous ways.
And when it comes to your one-on-ones, how are they institutionalized? Is it something that you leave up to the managers, because everybody's different, everybody needs different sort of rhythms or periods of time when they have one-on-ones with their colleagues? What are the ground rules for that?
Well, it's very loose, to be honest with you. We leave it up to the individual leaders and the individual managers. We provide some basic guidelines about how often they should meet and what the content should be considered. But other than that, it's up to the individual.
And what is the feedback that you're getting from the individuals? How do they perceive it? And also, how do the managers perceive it after they have done it for a few months, maybe?
Oh, I think managers at Cactus have been doing it for a long time now. So well before I came aboard. So the feedback is always pretty positive. That is definitely something that people want to keep, and they want to keep that synchronously. They don't have the desire to move that to an async means.
Okay, fantastic. And there's also another comment from Vincent, and he's talking about trust versus control as being very important. And we do know that, of course, building trust in a remote organization, but also hybrid organization, it can be quite complex. So when you look at Cactus communication, what are sort of the success factors that lead you to having a trustful environment?
It's funny. Trust is one of our core values. And when it comes to a decision, we default to trusting the employee versus having some sort of control measures. And I see a disturbing trend with a lot of companies that they're instituting employee surveillance as they're going hybrid or they're continuing with their remote work practices because they don't trust employees enough and they want to ensure that they're, quote, doing their job. Years ago, when I was doing consulting and remote work, back then we called it telework, when telework was a fairly new concept, people would always come up to me and they say, how do I ensure that my remote workers are actually working? And my answer was always the same. I would say, how do you know your people in the office are actually working right now? And they would say, well, I see them when they come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and they leave at 5 o'clock. And I say, great. Well, now you're managing their attendance. You have no idea of what they're actually doing and no performance metrics. So to me, it comes down to how you're measuring work. At Cactus, we're a very production-oriented environment. So we have a lot of key metrics around certain things that have to be met, performance targets and that sort of thing. So it really comes down to, are you meeting your performance targets or not? How you do it, when you do it, because we have very loose work hours. Managers can run that of when they want their employees to be available, or if they just let them work on their own and say, as long as you're meeting these performance targets, I don't care if you're working at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., just get the job done.
I think this question is also something that is always a huge thing with organizations that are going through a transition, the attendance or input-oriented management versus output-oriented management. And what I had the feeling, I'm not sure how in Cactus, maybe as you have a longer history of that, what my feeling was always the managers that I worked with is that they were really struggling to focus on output. They were really having struggles to set metrics or or being clear about what a colleague is doing and how much she or can be doing in a certain amount of time. And even the colleagues, when we were having team workshops discussing the topic, were struggling just with setting goals. What do you see here?
For us, like I said, because we're a production-oriented environment, it's very clear to look at the goals that we have to, or the targets we have to meet to make the customer happy. Yeah. And from there, kind of back off and look at interim goals and sub-level metrics and that sort of thing. So for us, because it's a production environment, it may be a little bit easier. I see other organizations that have with knowledge workers struggle a bit sometimes, right? So say like you have a lot of project managers in your business, right? And people will say, well, how do I know on a daily basis what they're doing? Well, that means the manager really has to understand the projects that project manager is working on. They have to understand the schedule so they can, when they talk to that project manager, they can see the progress of what was scheduled versus the actuals, and they can see if there's any gaps. What was the cause of those misses that they had? So it forces the manager to get more involved, to really understand what their employees are doing. And to me, that's a good thing.
Totally. But I think it needs a lot of, also it is a mindset shift. And in my opinion, it also sometimes needs some skills development on part of the managers. So we have another comment here from Liliana. And Liliana, I'm smiling now because the comment is about the on-site offices. So employees that are going to the on-site offices for a day or two are coming back and saying that they are more fun at online offices. They like it more being online. And I think this is something that we discussed at the beginning, right? That the way our office looks like and the way it is built up and how we use it needs to change. And I think we're still here in a transition phase, definitely. Jason, so if you look at Cactus, if you look at the goal of becoming remote first? Because you're saying that you're still undergoing the change.
Right.
Is this an ongoing change? Is it something that you sort of put a date there? How does it look like? What is the area that you still want to work on or focus on?
Right. I asked when I came into the company, I asked the leadership, I said, do you see this role existing 5 years from now? And one of the answers I got back was, if your role still exists 5 years from now, we're not doing something right. And so, of course, I'm thinking about my own longevity and career path, but I see this as evolving into something else, right? But the first step is to help the organization make the transition from that office-based culture to a more remote-based culture. So once we get through that, we'll see what happens next.
And I sometimes think that because all it has to do with, and I'm super biased because I was teaching culture and organizational culture for many years. I think this role, head of remote first, whatever you call it, it's a role about culture. It's culture transformation. And I think culture will always be there. So I'm not worried at all about the great job you're doing at Cactus. So I see it more as evolving and being a strategic partner to see that our culture and the way we're working together on an IT infrastructure process, people pillar or level, it is all working together. And having that in mind, I think this is how I see the role. What do you think about yourself, your role now?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think it's a combination of different things, right? Because we're talking about changing culture, which is a lot of creating awareness. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of training, but it's also based on technology, right? So there's bringing new technology into the business so that we can better communicate and collaborate together. So there's a technical aspect to the job as well. So it's kind of a mix of a bunch of different things.
And have you seen, if you look back now at your job, have you seen an involvement in the activities or the projects that you're working on? Like take it 1.5 years ago to now, or is it still more or less the same activities?
I think we've accelerated, Pat. In the past 6 months since I've been on board, we seem to accelerate our transition. A lot of that has to do with the support that we get from the executive team, from the CEO on down. We have full support. And when I came in, I was very glad to hear when my CEO said, in the first year at least, I'm not looking to save any money. I know this is an investment in our company. It's an investment in our people. So even if we have to spend money, that is okay. We're going to make this transition work. And that was music to my ears, because years ago when I was doing consulting, the primary driver for a lot of companies to go remote was to reduce their real estate footprint, right? To save on some of their corporate real estate costs. And that's not the case at Cactus. We're looking at this as a true culture and changing the way that we work. And that's going to require investments.
And I love that. Jason, I think this is a fantastic sort of last message to finalize our conversation, to finish up our conversation, that it's not all about sort of the saving aspect, the money saving aspect, right, but rather about how can you support the transition into a new way of working. Jason, it was fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking your time. And all of you out there, connect with Jason. He is tagged in the event as a speaker, and you find him also in the thread there. Connect with him here on LinkedIn and follow his head of remote first work at Cactus Communication. Jason, thank you so much for being with us. And you know that I prepared a virtual cocktail for you backstage. I'll be there in a minute.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me, Barbara. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Virtual Space Heroes. I got quite a few questions beforehand, and I just ticked them off. All of them were asked during the conversation. Thanks for your time, for joining us, and also for providing us with your comments. And well, you know that the journey continues. Next week, we are going live again on Tuesday, and I have with me Betsy Church-Bola from GitLab. She's also, as Jason, a remote evangelist, and I'm going to talk with her about her journey and what GitLab, one of the biggest IT remote company and one of the I would say, the sources of inspiration for heads of remote and remote work in general. So check it out, mark it in your calendar, and let us know your questions also beforehand. With that, thanks a lot. And I see here again a few thanks coming in. Thanks a lot, Liliana, for being with us. And I hope to see you next week. And don't forget to become a virtual space hero.